Have you ever wondered what it's like to get feedback from a public speaking coach? If so, today is your lucky day. I'm going to be critiquing a TED Talk. You'll get to watch me break down bit by bit what works, what could be improved, and at the end of the video, I'll be giving you 5 takeaways that you can apply directly to your next presentation. Hi everyone, my name is Nancy Hardcastle. I'm a public speaking coach. I help badass speakers in the field of human trafficking tell their truth on their terms in a way that their audience can't resist. As you've already heard today, I'll be doing a critique of a TED Talk. It's delivered by a man named Richard Lee, and he was kind enough to give me permission. He was willing to be my guinea pig and said, sure, go ahead, do the critique, let other people learn from what you have to say. So buckle up and let's get started. Here's the opening to Richard Lee's talk. What I'm going to be doing is just letting him talk, letting you listen, and then after about 1.5 minutes, I'll be pausing it and giving comments, and then we'll continue from there. So I'm going to go ahead and press play now.
Before I begin, can I borrow $20 from someone? Does anybody have $20? Yeah, can I borrow $20? Awesome, thank you. This $20, for many of us, represents a dinner out at a restaurant tonight for one. Or a movie ticket to the latest IMAX 3D movie theater, or maybe a pledge on Kickstarter for the best backpack ever invented. But the bottom line for us is that this $20 is somewhat disposable for many of us. Now, in other places around the world, this $20 represents food for a family for a week, or medicine for a child to remain healthy. But sadly, in far too many places in the world, this $20, the $20 that you gave me because I'm a speaker on a stage, this $20 can enslave my family for generations.
All right, so let's pause it here. And I want you to notice a couple things. First of all, his introduction was very captivating. He did something very unusual, and that was he asked if he could borrow $20 from somebody in the audience. I've never seen a speaker do this. I thought it was very clever. And of course, you're wondering, why would he do this? So it grabs your attention and also raises curiosity. So it's an unusual way to do an introduction, and it works. And the point of an introduction is to capture your audience's attention. So I would say that he definitely achieved that goal. And the next thing I wanted to point out is how confident he appears, his delivery in general. So you get the impression that this guy knows what he's doing. He's practiced, he's calm, he's cool, he's collected, he's in control. And so as an audience member, when you encounter somebody like that as a speaker, it allows the audience member to just go, okay, I can just pay attention. I don't have to wonder if he's going to be okay. Is he going to remember? Is he forgetting? I don't understand what's going on. There's none of that, right? It's totally clear. You know you're in good hands. And that's the impression that you want to create when you step on stage. So he's created a wonderful first impression. The last thing I want to mention is how he transitions from this general idea, which was, this is what $20 might mean to you, this is what it might mean to the average person, and then he brings it right down to his topic, which is, but to many people in the world, this $20 represents a debt that cannot be paid. So suddenly we've gone from, dinner out for $20 or investing in that amazing backpack to, oh, this $20 means something else to other people, and that's what we're going to talk about. All right, let's continue.
A simple and seemingly insignificant loan of this $20 for food or clothes or school supplies can quickly become a complex and insurmountable debt. A slave owner will loan this $20 to a family and simply say, come to my factory and work it off. But the reality is, it's a debt that is impossible to pay off, because the loan is a trick to just create a false sense of obligation. And once they do that, they got you.
All right, I'm going to pause right there because that was a super effective pause. And also there was this physicality to it. So he said, once they do that, once they have indebted a person, right, they got you. And he sort of finalizes that action by putting the money in his pocket. It's the idea of it's gone. And then he pauses. So that you get the gravity of that. Somebody has just become enslaved for $20. And that's worth a pause. That's worth letting your audience get that information and let it sink in.
Slavery today exists not so much as the picture of physical shackles of bars and chains, as much as it is the financial shackles of debt and poverty. But it's just as binding, and the enslavement is just as real.
I want to point out a way that Richard organized his content that I felt was effective. Usually speakers will give you a term and then they'll define the term and then they'll give you some examples and some details. Richard did pretty much the opposite. He said, here's the scenario, here's how it happens, here's what it looks like, and this is called slavery. We often use the term human trafficking in the same kind of situation that Richard is describing. One of the reasons why this type of organization is effective is because if you start off right away saying, let me tell you what slavery is, or let me tell you what human trafficking is, a couple things might happen among your audience members. One, they might already think that they know and they tune out. And they may know a little bit, but they may not know the full extent of it. And two, if they have a negative idea about that topic or that term, then they're also going to be less likely to listen. And so this is a kind of way of bringing in your audience, of drawing them in without any more effort than if you did it the other way.
There are 40 million slaves in the world today, many of whom were bought for as little as $20. Now, this number 40 million can be a little bit hard to comprehend, so let me break this down for you today. 40 million people is approximately the population of the great state of New Jersey, of New York, and Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and Vermont.
Here, Richard had the challenge of trying to help his audience members understand how big the number 40 million really is. Since his audience was largely American, he chose to pick some states in the United States that people could understand. New York and New Jersey are densely populated, to help them have a better idea. This is really important, the idea of taking something that's very abstract, which large numbers tend to be abstract, and doing something to make them more concrete. So if you say 40 million or 80 million or any million of anything, people start wondering, well, how much is that? If it's miles, how long does it take to travel that far? If it's dollars, how long would it take to spend? Or how much could you buy? This type of thing. And so rather than allowing us to be sitting there wondering, exactly how many is 40 million, he gave us this very concrete example. The second thing that he did that was very clever was his delivery. He tricked us. We thought he was done when he said New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And we thought he was done because he paused and the inflection in his voice went down. And Connecticut. And then he continued. And we thought he was done because he did that same inflection, but he wasn't done. He did one more and one more. So by tricking us, it created this sense of, we're done. Oh, no, we're not done yet. Oh, wow, it's more, and it's more, and it's more. And that's exactly the point that he was trying to make, that 40 million is a huge number. And when you're talking about 40 million people who are enslaved, it's a tragic number.
Now, you would think that if the population of these 6 states were all enslaved, you would think that the world would know about it, that the world would be outraged by it, and that the world would do something about it. And yet, somehow, 40 million people have slipped under the radar, and the world, for the most part, does not know about it, is not outraged by it, and is certainly not doing enough about it. These 40 million people are located throughout the world. And so they are boys on a boat in Ghana. They are girls sold in bars in the Dominican Republic. They are families in factories in India. And they are little children in front of webcams in the Philippines.
So I don't know if you noticed right now, but when he was getting really sort of worked up about this problem, his body language became stronger. And he was moving his hands more, and he was moving his body more, and he had this kind of energy. And that comes naturally to him because he's passionate about this topic. And so what I really encourage speakers to do is, when you're passionate about that, let yourself go. Let your voice get louder. Let your arms move around more. Let your body move, because that's an important part of communication. Don't try to sort of hold it all back and sort of be quieter. This is not the moment to be quiet. The other thing I wanted to point out is that he gave those really specific examples, because it's again that idea of taking this abstract thing and making it concrete. So instead of just, wow, there's 40 million people being human trafficked, there's children in this situation, and there's women in this situation. And he gives vivid details, and so you can see it. And it again helps that gravity of the situation and the horribleness of the situation really sink in.
We met some of these 40 million slaves when in 2011 we received a phone call, and the voice on the other end of the phone told us about a brick factory in Chennai, India. And what they told us about this factory was that the factory owner was in fact a slave owner, and they asked us to intervene. So we accompanied Indian officials and police on their rescue operation at this factory. And we knew that what we would find would be absolutely heartbreaking. But what we didn't know is that when we asked, who of you would like to go free, 512 hands went up.
All right, I want to pause it right here because I want to point out how powerful this photo is. So he didn't just say, all the people raise their hand. He shows us these people raising their hand and what they look like and what their situation is. If you have photos like that, use them. They're much more powerful than a PowerPoint slide with a lot of words on it. Photos they touch the emotion.
It was our largest rescue operation at that time. And that's when the stories of abuse began pouring out. Men, women, children forced to work 16 to 18 hours a day, molding and baking and carrying bricks for little to no pay, violent beatings for not showing up to work or not doing enough work. The words told part of the story, but it was the scars on the bodies and the fear in their eyes that told us what we didn't need to hear. But now, these people...
Did you notice that pause? I had to pause to point it out to you.
Free. Their lives are being rewritten. Lives like Raja's and Sunitha's. The Indian government stepped up and issued release certificates and declared all of them free.
All right, so again, another wonderful photo. 2 individuals, and he said their names. And so again, it's not just all these people anymore, and it's not even just women like this or children like this, but it's this man right here and this woman right here, and this is what it meant to them. So super powerful, actual people in actual situations, not just an abstract idea.
512 hands went up asking for their freedom, and that's exactly what they got, their freedom. But there's another part of this story that doesn't quite make it into the papers. You see, the slave owner was a man of considerable wealth and influence. And so he didn't spend one day in jail. And so while 512 people went to sleep that night in their newfound freedom, the slave owner also went to bed a free man. Now, sadly, throughout the world, this is a situation that we find far too often. A justice system that is unable or unwilling to arrest a slave owner. And unfortunately, in 2011, the Indian government was just one of those systems. Now, fast forward to 2016. We received another phone call about a brick factory in Chennai, and the frantic voice on the other end of the line told us the stories of violence and abuse, and it was familiar to us because it was the same factory and the same owner 5 years later. Once again, with Indian officials and with police, we accompanied them on their rescue operation. And this time when we asked who of you would like to go free, it wasn't 512 hands that went up. It was 564. You see, because the slave owner didn't spend one day in jail, he was able to replenish every single one of his slaves and then some. Once again, the Indian government stepped up and issued release certificates and declared each one of them free. 564 lives beginning their new life in their newfound freedom. But something happened in India between 2011 and 2016. During that...
Okay, this is a small thing, but I want to point it out because it adds something to the delivery. And that is the way he gestures. So the general rule for gesturing is you just want to do what comes naturally. It's always really awkward and obvious if you're uncomfortable with your gestures. But he did this really simple one, and he said, from this year to this year, here's what happened. And there was this movement that happened in between. And so you get the idea of time and also contrast. This compared to this and the time in between. It's a simple gesture. It's easy to do. I'm doing it up high because I'm using a webcam, but if you're standing in front of people, you don't have to think about that. You could just gesture as he is in front of his chest. Let's keep going.
Intermediary time, the Indian government passed an amendment that made the punishment for slavery much more severe for the slave owner. And so while in 2011, the slave owner went free, in 2016, I'm happy to tell you that that slave owner was arrested and went to jail. Now, hopefully we can see that the difference in these stories is not what happened to 500 people. In both stories, 500 people were set free. The difference is not what happened to 500 people, but what happened to one person. In one story, the man went free. In the other story, the slave owner was arrested. Now, we will always pursue freedom for the enslaved, but we will also not stop pursuing arrest for the slave owner. In fact, for slavery to end, it's not enough to just rescue the slave. For slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner.
I want you to notice the way that Richard uses stories to build up his argument. The first story he told was about the over 500 people who were rescued by his organization, but unfortunately, the slave owner did not serve any time in prison. In the second story, again, over 500 people were rescued, but this time, because of the change that had happened over those years, the slave owner went to prison and was not able to go back again and enslave more people. So this allows the audience to come to their own conclusion, and that is, gee, it seems much more effective if you arrest the slave owner than if you simply rescue people. This is a great way to create an argument. You could obviously start out by saying you have to arrest the slave owner, and here's why. But stories are particularly effective in grabbing your audience's attention, in maintaining that attention. And in this case, we got to listen to 2 whole stories and hear the outcome. And like I said, then we can see for ourselves. This is an effective way of creating an argument.
If that slave owner had gone to jail in 2011, that's 564 lives who would have never been enslaved. In other words, when you arrest one, you save hundreds. You arrest one slave owner, and that represents hundreds of lives who will never be enslaved and never need rescue. What became clear to us early on in the work that we did was that rescuing slaves is not enough to end slavery. For slavery to end, you have to arrest the slave owner. Now, another interesting thing that happens when you arrest the slave owner, and that is other slave owners take notice. You see, the reason why slavery exists in these communities is because the lack of adequate law enforcement. It's not that these laws do not exist, it's that they are not enforced. And there's no fear of prosecution. If you take our work that we've done in the country of Cambodia, 15 years ago, the brothel industry was running rampant with the sale of young girls for sex in the sex trade industry in Cambodia.
I want you to notice a few things about this photo. The first one is that it clearly communicates how young these girls really are, which is heartbreaking. Another thing is that it's whited out their faces. It preserves their identity. This is really important when you're using photos of actual survivors. The other thing that I like about it is that it's not sensationalized. These gals have not been sexualized. It's not a picture showing them wearing tight-fitting clothing or makeup or anything like that. They just look like little girls, and that's the way it should be.
But we worked with the government to work to arrest slave owners, and what ended up happening was amazing. 15 years ago, when police would look the other way while thousands of young girls were trafficked into the brothel industry, today, a specialized anti-human trafficking police force canvasses every corner of the country. 15 years ago, virtually no one went to prison for the sex trafficking of minors. Today, hundreds of pedophiles and traffickers sit in Cambodian prisons. 15 years ago, credible estimates were as high as 15 to 30% of all sex workers were underage. We saw thousands with our own eyes. But we started working with the government to arrest slave owners. And in a recent independent survey, the percentage of young minors available for sex in the brothel industry in Cambodia plummeted to less than 0.1%.
All right, couple things to point out. First one is his use of repetition. So he said, I think 3 different times, 15 years ago and now, 15 years ago and now. If you use repetition judiciously, not overdoing it, it can be very effective in really hammering away that point that you're trying to make. And then I want to point out the text on this slide. So simple. There's only there's 4 words and 1 number. This kind of slide is very effective because the person can look at it, they can read it in less than 2 seconds, and they get it. And they can see, because it's 0.1%, it's a very small number. And so now you understand, wow, he's been talking about thousands and thousands, and now we're down to 0.1% that this is happening to. So really encourage you, when you're talking about text on a slide, less is always more. Make it really simple for the audience member to read it and grasp it.
But hold on. I mean, what happened here? How did thousands of girls find their freedom from the shackles of the sex industry in Cambodia? Did we physically remove all of these girls from their brothels? No. Did we physically close down all of these brothels? No. What happened is we started working with the government. And when the government started stepping up and arresting slave owners, what would happen is that a brothel owner would look down the street and they would see that that other brothel closed down. And they would not see the brothel owner anymore because he's sitting in jail. And then he would turn around and he would look at his own place and he would say, well, I don't want to be arrested. The only reason that I'm using young girls is because there's no fear of prosecution. And so he stops using young girls because the law is being enforced. In other words, when you stop one, you stop others.
All right, I'm going to actually go back so you can see that. There you go. When you stop one, you stop others. So he's definitely following the less is more rule when it comes to text on the slide. That's the first thing, just 4 words he's got and an equal sign. So it's actually the same as the other one, except instead of the equal sign, he had a number, just a few words. And in this case, he's got this repetition again, right? Stop and stop. So he's figured out this very clever way to communicate his message in just a few words, and it's also memorable. Really commend him on this. Great slide here.
When you stop one, you stop others. You stop one slave owner, and it stops other slave owners from ever using slaves in the first place. Now, hopefully, by now, you can understand and appreciate that for slavery to end, it's not enough to just rescue the slave. That may end slavery for that individual, but for slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner. But now you may be asking, well, how do you do that?
This is a good strategy, and that is to address questions that you suspect your audience members have. Just go ahead and address them. You don't need to wait for the Q&A. And then it also gives you an opportunity to explain more.
I mean, you're not the ones arresting them, right? I mean, you have to use the police and the courts to be able to do that. And aren't they exactly the people that weren't doing this job for so long? You're right. We're not the ones arresting anyone. We're not building jails and throwing people in it. By the way, that would be kidnapping. We need the police. You can't arrest someone without police intervention. And we need the courts to secure the conviction. You need the government to end slavery. But an amazing thing has happened. We found that as we step in to do the work, the government steps up to do the work themselves.
Same pattern and same repetition, right? Instead of, I think before it was 1 and 1, now it's step and step. And also the in and up is very clever. It's very pithy. It's easy to remember. Step in equals step up. We stepped in, the government stepped up. So this is the kind of thing, if you're wondering, why would I do this? Why would I want to do this? It's because after the presentation, that little thing, step in, step up, it's going to stick in your head, and when you go talk to somebody else about this presentation, that's something that you'll likely remember. And you'll remember the idea of if an organization steps in, it's more likely that the police and the government are going to step up.
We step in so that the government steps up. And so when we step in and the government steps up, what that looks like is a police force that before would turn a blind eye to investigating crimes and arresting criminals, now begin to see a pathway of justice being made clear to them. And so now they build the will to be able to investigate and to arrest. And so in a court system that before was not used to trying cases of human trafficking and slavery, now is seeing the pathway of justice and the success of swift and severe punishment for the slave owners, and they begin to follow that pathway by themselves. When you consider a government that would allow a slave owner 512 times over to walk away as a free man. That same government changes its laws to make the punishment more severe. And that same government trains their police officers to do the arrest. When you consider that the Indian government was once known as the epicenter of slavery in the world, and just a few months ago hosted an international anti-human trafficking conference in their country with key stakeholders from 18 other countries, when that same country, which was known as the epicenter of slavery in the world, now wants to be known as the epicenter of ending slavery in the world. When we step in, governments step up.
I love that example because not only is it so positive and encouraging that India's government and police force has actually changed what they're doing and they're actually helping trafficking survivors or trafficking victims, but they're even taking it a step further and they're trying to lead other countries in this progress. I feel like it's a very powerful example. Again, it's very concrete. And it makes the point that he's trying to make, which is, as he said again, when we, meaning his organization or other organizations, get involved, then the governments of these individual countries will also get involved. And in this case, seems like in a way that was even bigger than they had imagined.
And so it is just true that good organizations will do the work the government is unwilling to do. Great organizations will work with the government to help them do it themselves. The power of a false loan of $20 is enough to enslave a person for years. But the power of a government stepping up to arrest slave owners is far more powerful. There are 40 million people trapped in slavery in the world today. Here's how to end it.
I want to point out that he's using something that I call the circling back technique. And so at the very beginning, he started his introduction by talking about this $20 bill and what it means. Now in his conclusion, he's taken out that $20 and he's going back and reminding us where he started, essentially.
For slavery to end, you must arrest the slave owner. If you rescue a slave, you will change a life. But if you arrest a slave owner, you will change a whole community. And when governments step up to arrest slave owners, you will change the world. And when that happens, this loan of $20 can simply be paid back. Thank you.
All right, so last comment, again, that physicality of doing what he was saying. The words were, this loan can simply be paid back. And he actually walks and hands that $20 bill to the audience member who gave it to him. When you combine what you're saying with some sort of physicality, it's a good thing. It gets your point across even better. So in this final part of the critique, I want to talk a little bit about a few ways that I think that Richard could improve in his public speaking in general, and then also give you the takeaways that I promised you at the beginning of the video. So clearly he's doing a great job. I picked this video because I wanted to give you an example of somebody who's doing very well in their presentations. And again, I just want to say thank you, Richard, if you're watching, for letting me do this public critique. I really appreciate it. So one suggestion I have is to work on varying your tone and your volume and your pacing. So as I pointed out several times, you did great with the pause, but Richard has a tendency to speak like this most of the time. And this is great when you've got one point and you're trying to hammer it home. But if you speak like this the whole time, it's a little tiring for the audience because it feels like this. It feels very sort of insistent and loud. And so what I would suggest is go ahead and keep that, but just try at other times perhaps to be a little more conversational, perhaps to lower your volume just a little bit. And this leads me to another point, and that is I wished that there had been some transparency on his part. And the reason why I segued into that idea is because a lot of times when we're talking about ourselves and we're talking about something personal, our tone changes. It kind of changes automatically. And we often will bring our volume a little bit softer, and our voice becomes a little bit softer because we're talking about something that's closer to our heart. And so I think if Richard was willing to give us a little insight into who is Richard and what makes Richard tick, and how did he feel about all these things. And I realized, it was a TED Talk. You only have 17 minutes. But transparency is really powerful. It makes your audience like you and trust you. And so I would suggest trying to add in a little bit of transparency. I think that will help with the tone and also help your audience connect to you more easily. And the last thing I suggest to Richard is to include some kind of a call to action. So gave us great information, but I don't really know what he wants me to do with this information. Does he want me to give money to his organization? Does he want me to volunteer at his organization or tell other people about this? I wasn't really clear. So a clear call to action really will help you get your audience to take action. Make it clear what you want them to do. So here we are, at the very end, with our takeaways. So the idea is, what can you learn from what I pointed out in this video that you can apply to your own presentation? So the first one you could probably already guess is the pause. If you say something powerful, take a moment, let it sink in. And often people feel uncomfortable with that pause because it's silence, and they feel like they have to fill the silence. But that's partly why it's so powerful, is because we're not used to silence. The next thing I suggest is that you think of an introduction that's going to grab your audience. Do not start by saying, "My name is, and this is what I do." Okay, it's not captivating enough. Do something like what he did, get your audience involved, say something startling, tell a story, anything but the usual. The third thing is, when you give examples, give very specific examples. If you can give a photo of the example, all the better. Now, I understand in this field, we often cannot use photos of real trafficking victims and survivors. But there's plenty of free photos that you can use. And if you want to say, this isn't this person, but she was in this kind of state of mind. Or this is what she might have looked like when she was wondering what she was going to do. Or this was the situation he was in when he was being trafficked. So that we can connect this person that you're talking about with a visual, and visuals stick in our mind. That's why they're so important. The fourth takeaway I want to give you has to do with creating your PowerPoint slides. As I pointed out several times, Richard did a great job of following the less is more rule, and that is essentially just putting fewer words on your slide. They were very simple. You could easily read them and grasp the meaning in just a few seconds. So those are really the most powerful slides. And then, of course, the photos were great. The photos were evocative, and as I said in the video, really helping us see specifically what he was talking about. The final takeaway is using the circle back technique. So when you're thinking about your introduction and trying to create that introduction, ask yourself right then, how can I then at the end come back to this idea? When you use that technique, the effect is that the audience members have the sense of, oh, it's complete, it's finished. It's the idea of wrapping it up. I'd love to hear how you do using these techniques. Get in touch with me at standupbegreat.com. Of course, if you have any questions, if you need my help, I'd love to help you. Bye-bye.